The sun, a tired orange disk, was already slipping below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the manicured lawns of Oak Creek Estates. In the heart of this suburban utopia, a battle was brewing, a conflict as old as time itself. The clash between individual liberty and collective conformity. The front lines were drawn at the property of Marcus and Sarah Vance, and the general on the opposing side was none other than the HOA president, Richard Sterling. Richard, a man whose love for rules was surpassed only by his love for his perfectly trimmed barn, strode with purpose up the Vance's driveway. He clutched a clipboard to his chest like a holy relic, its pages filled with a litany of infractions, all of them leading to one grand transgression. The barn, it was a beautiful structure, or so Marcus thought. Crafted from reclaimed timber and weathered stone, it sat at the far end of their 2-acre lot, a rustic sentinel amidst the cookie-cutter houses. The barn wasn't for animals. It was a sanctuary, a workshop for Marcus, a place where he could escape the sterile perfection of suburbia and lose himself in the scent of sawdust and the hum of power tools. But to Richard Sterling, it was an abomination. "Mr. Vance," Richard announced, his voice a low, resonant baritone that he'd perfected over years of HOA meetings. "I'm here to discuss the outstanding violation on your property." Marcus, a man more comfortable in a t-shirt and jeans than the polo shirts favored by his neighbors, sighed. He'd been expecting this. "Richard, we've been over this. The barn is in full compliance with the county zoning laws. We had a permit for it, and it passed all inspections." "County laws are one thing, Mr. Vance," Richard said, tapping the clipboard with a manicured finger. "HOA bylaws are another. Article 7, Section 4, subsection C states, and I quote, 'No auxiliary structures exceeding 200 square feet shall be erected without the express written consent of the Architectural Review Board.' Your barn is 1,500 square feet. And we got that consent," Marcus countered, his patience wearing thin. "We submitted the plans, and the board approved them 3 months ago." A shadow of annoyance crossed Richard's face. "The previous board? Yes. I have since assumed the presidency, and upon review of the minutes, I have found a procedural error. The vote was not unanimous. One board member was absent, and as such, the approval is null and void." Marcus stared at him, dumbfounded. "You're kidding me? You're revoking a valid approval because someone wasn't there. That's absurd, Richard." "It's the bylaws, Mr. Vance," Richard said, a smug expression spreading across his face. "They are the bedrock of our community. Without them, we would descend into anarchy. And that is why I am formally demanding that you begin the demolition process on this eyesore within 30 days. The word demolition hung in the air, a final, crushing blow. Marcus felt a surge of anger, a red-hot wave that threatened to consume him. "You can't be serious. We spent a year building that barn. We put our heart and soul into it." "I am perfectly serious," Richard replied, his voice devoid of any empathy. "Consider this your final warning. If you fail to comply, we will begin levying fines of $500 a day." and we will take legal action to ensure the bylaws are upheld." With that, Richard turned and marched back down the driveway, leaving Marcus standing alone in the fading light, a man whose sanctuary was about to be turned into a pile of rubble. Sarah found him a few minutes later, still staring at the barn, as if it might disappear with a simple wish. She wrapped her arms around his waist. "He came, didn't he?" Marcus just nodded. "He wants us to tear it down. Says the approval was invalid." Sarah's face hardened. She was a woman who rarely raised her voice, but when she did, it carried the weight of 1,000 storms. "He can't do that. It's a bullying tactic, pure and simple. We'll fight him." "How?" Marcus asked, his voice full of defeat. "He's got the bylaws on his side, and he's clearly crazy enough to bankrupt us with fines. He doesn't have everything on his side," Sarah said, a glint of steel in her eyes. "He doesn't know what's inside that barn." Marcus looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Sarah smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "I'm an FBI agent, Marcus, and that barn, it's not just your workshop, it's my secure, government-approved office, and Richard Sterling just demanded that we demolish a federal building." The revelation was a moment of pure, cinematic clarity. Marcus's jaw dropped. He'd known Sarah had a high-security clearance and a top-secret job, but she had always been vague about the details. She'd explained away the strange hours, the frequent travel, the late-night phone calls by saying she was a consultant for the government. He'd never once questioned the truth of the matter, and he had certainly never guessed that his beautiful barn was also a secret fortress of federal law enforcement. You're an FBI agent," he stammered. Sarah laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that echoed in the quiet evening. "Special Agent Sarah Vance, Counter-Terrorism Division. I work on cases that you only read about in the news. The barn, as you so lovingly call it, is ASCIF. A what? Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It is a secure space where I can work on classified materials without any risk of information leakage. The government paid for its construction, and it's wired with more surveillance and security than a small bank. The only thing they couldn't pay for was the rustic aesthetic." Marcus just shook his head, a wave of stunned realization washing over him. The strange antennae on the roof, the heavy-duty locks, the fact that Sarah had installed a panic room and a self-destruct system, all of it suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. "So, Richard just told us to tear down a federal building." "Pretty much," Sarah said, a wicked grin on her face. "And I think at time he found out exactly what he is messing with." The next day, Richard Sterling received a certified letter. He opened it with a sense of triumph, assuming it was a legal notice from some high-powered law firm that the Vances had hired, which he was more than prepared to counter. What he read instead made the blood drain from his face. The letter was concise, to the point, and written in a language that made his carefully constructed world of bylaws and regulations crumble into dust. It stated that the structure on the Vance property was, in fact, a federally owned and operated facility, a critical part of a national security network. It went on to inform him, in no uncertain terms, that any attempt to interfere with its operation, including but not limited to demanding its demolition, would be considered a federal offense, punishable by significant fines and imprisonment. Attached to the letter was a single laminated card. It was Sarah's official FBI identification. Richard stared at the photo of a stun-faced Sarah Vance, her title printed clearly below. Special Agent. The clipboard that had been his scepter of authority felt suddenly very heavy. He sat down hard in his ergonomic office chair, his mind reeling. The barn, the eyesore, the blight on the neighborhood. It was a secret FBI office. The thought was so preposterous, so utterly out of place in their tidy, predictable community that he almost laughed. But the letter was real. The ID was real. The threat was real. Richard Sterling, who had spent his life meticulously planning every detail, had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had picked a fight with the wrong person, a person whose authority far exceeded his own. He spent the next few hours in a state of nervous panic, his finely honed organizational skills failing him completely. He tried to call the Vances, but they didn't answer. He considered calling his lawyer, but what would he say? I demanded that my neighbor tear down a secret FBI office, and now I'm afraid I'm going to jail. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Finally, he did the only thing he could think of. He put on his most intimidating suit, got in his car, and drove back to the Vance's house. This time, there was no strut in his step, no clipboard clutched to his chest. He knocked on the door with a trembling hand. Marcus opened it, a half-smile playing on his lips. He was in his workshop clothes, a smear of sawdust on his cheek. "Richard," he said, his voice a picture of polite innocence. "What can I do for you?" Richard swallowed hard. "Mr. Vance, I wanted to apologize. I believe there was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Marcus asked, his smile widening. "You told us to tear down our home." "Richard, I'd say that's a bit more than a misunderstanding. No, not your home. The barn," Richard stammered, his eyes darting towards the rustic structure at the end of the property. "E.B., I've since been made aware of its unique status." Just then, Sarah appeared behind Marcus, a cup of coffee in her hand. She was dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking anything but the formidable federal agent Richard knew her to be. "Richard," she said, her voice soft but with an edge of steel that made him flinch. "I'm glad you stopped by. We were just discussing your generous offer to assist with the demolition." Richard's face went pale. No, Special Agent Vance, I would never. I mean, the barn is a lovely structure, a real asset to the community. I've always said so." Marcus had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. Richard Sterling, the man who had called their barn an eyesore, was now calling it an asset. Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee. "I'm glad you feel that way. Because, you see, the government has decided to expand its presence here. The good news is they want to do it in a way that is in keeping with the aesthetic of Oak Creek Estates. And they've decided that your home, Richard, with its ideal central location and meticulously manicured lawn, would be the perfect site for a new, larger facility. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. My home. Yes, Sarah said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. We're thinking of a new counter-terrorism training center. It would, of course, have to be a secure facility. So we'd need to demolish the existing structure and rebuild. Don't worry, the government will compensate you handsomely for the inconvenience. And of course, there would be a temporary relocation while we build. We're thinking somewhere in rural Alaska would be a good fit with your love of quiet and open spaces. The terror in Richard's eyes was palpable. He had been so focused on his own power, his own rules, that he had never once considered the possibility that there might be a force more powerful than his HOA. Now, faced with the prospect of his perfect home being torn down and replaced with a counter-terrorism training center, he saw the absurdity of his actions. No, please, Agent Vance, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I was wrong. The barn it's a monument to craftsmanship, a beacon of individual expression in a world of conformity. We should be proud to have it in our neighborhood. Sarah smiled, and this time it was a real, triumphant smile. I'm glad we could see eye to eye, Richard. As for the expansion, let's just say that we've decided the current facility is more than adequate. For now. For now? Richard let out a shaky breath, the tension leaving his body in a rush. Thank you. Thank you so much. He stumbled backward. As if, ecco denti. Get away fast enough. I'll be sure to update the HOA records to reflect that the barn is a permanent and much-loved part of the community. In fact, I'll even propose a resolution to name it the Vance Memorial Barn. It's a lovely name, isn't it? It's perfect, Richard Marco said, unable to contain his amusement any longer. With a final, desperate nod, Richard turned and fled, leaving the Vances alone on their porch, the setting sun casting a golden light on their victorious faces. You're a terrible person. You know that, Marca said, wrapping an arm around Sarah's shoulders. I know, she replied, leaning her head against his, and I'm a terrible liar. The government has no interest in turning his home into a training center. I know that, too, Marcus said, but it was a beautiful bluff. He looked at the barn. Their beautiful, secret, federal barn, standing tall and proud against the fading sky. It was no longer just his workshop. It was a monument to their victory, a symbol of the day that a humble barn and a quiet FBI agent taught a power-hungry HOA president a lesson he would never forget. And as the night fell and the stars began to appear one by one, Marcus and Sarah Vance knew that their barn and their home were finally safe.